The other thing that I think really made a difference for me when I was going through Top Gun as a student, but more importantly as an instructor, was just aggressiveness, like targeted and constrained aggressiveness. It really did teach me that you can achieve almost anything you put your mind to as long as you're willing to just break down the problem and put the resources against it to solve it. And I found it to be a very powerful thing because I used it throughout the rest of my military career. I used it during my time in the presidential administration. I used it afterward as I'm, consulting and doing work for others, right? So you can fall into a rut. You can feel like this is the lane I'm supposed to swim in, and I can't really break out of this rut. And it's like, no, you can, but you also have to realize that there's going to be a lot of hard work and dedication that goes into it, and that's going to require maximum effort on your part for some period of time until you can break into the swim lane you want.
I am so excited about this one. If you are a fan of Top Gun, the movie, you're going to love this interview. My guest, former naval aviator, Top Gun instructor, and speechwriter for Secretary of Defense James Mattis, Guy Snodgrass. Welcome to the Art of Excellence. In the words of Aristotle, excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. I am your host, Glenn Zweig. Join me now as I dive into the lives and careers of world-class entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, scientists, thought leaders, and explorers to uncover the ingredients to their extraordinary accomplishments. My guest today is Guy Snodgrass. Guy recently served as Director of Communications and Chief Speechwriter to Secretary of Defense James Mattis. A former naval aviator, he served as commanding officer of a fighter squadron based in Japan, a Top Gun instructor, and a combat pilot over the skies of Iraq. Today, he is the founder and CEO of Defense Analytics, a strategic consulting and advisory firm. He is the author of Holding the Line, Inside Trump's Pentagon with Secretary Mattis, and his latest book, which is titled Top Gun's Top 10, Leadership Lessons from the Cockpit. Okay to call you Guy?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that being the case, Guy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
So for starters, and I'm guessing not the first time you've been asked this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You must have seen the Top Gun sequel a year or two back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, saw the movie, saw the original as well. In fact, the original movie is what inspired me to want to be a Top Gun instructor.
Well, you just stole my second question. That's okay, though. Actually, let's go there, because it is, to this day, that first one is one of my favorite movies I've ever seen. It was 1986 that it came out. So I was a junior in high school, but I think you were like 10 years old.
Yeah, sure was. I was 10 years old when it came out, and I remember my parents brought home the VHS tape from the video rental store back when we had those. Mm-hmm. And they had to fast forward through the steamy Kelly McGillis parts. But I just remember being captivated by the flying and the fighter jets and the machismo. So, that was when I was 10. And then some other experiences I had as I continued through to high school and beyond is what really stoked that passion to want to kind of follow that dream.
Who did you identify with? Were you Maverick?
Yeah, I think so. I wanted to be a pilot. Goose was a backseater, which we would call a weapons systems officer or a WISO. So he was the person sitting in the backseat. Maverick, I didn't necessarily care for his brashness. I've never been that style of individual, mm-hmm. but I think his ability to think outside the box, to be able to kind of do whatever it took to succeed and find success for the team are things that resonated with me. And frankly, I like the narrative arc that Hollywood put together, where you start off and he's this brash young pilot who breaks the rules basically just because he can. Mm-hmm. And then you watch that maturation play out throughout that first movie, where now he kind of gets it. He gets what it's like to be a part of a team, to grow, to be a leader of that team. And then of course you see that continue to play out in this most recent one with Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah. So did you think the flying sequences, the fighting sequences, were these pretty realistic?
Well, I thought so as a kid, and
Yeah.
then I was pleased to see that whenever I, grew older, when I became a fighter pilot in my own right, when I became a Top Gun instructor, and learned more about how Paramount Pictures and the producers had worked in partnership with Top Gun, the institution, and with the
Hmm.
U.S. Navy to actually put cameras in the planes and to capture real flying scenes. Same thing they did for the second movie. So the flying scenes themselves are all authentic and taken from real flights that the Navy did.
Hmm. So I don't think I ever knew the origin story of Top Gun before I read your book. So the school was conceived during the Vietnam War when our fighter pilots were essentially getting their asses kicked. So it was essentially born out of necessity.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you captured it accurately. If you think about the advent of putting planes of any type, let alone fighter planes, on these ships that are moving around at sea, that is a very recent phenomenon. Only really started in World War II, and we were very good at it. Then you get kind of into that Korean War time period in the 1950s, and we were still good, but had fallen off just a little bit. And then, just like you referenced, we fast forward into the Vietnam War era in the late 1960s. Suddenly, the U.S. Navy, we've got this thing called a kill ratio, which you read about. Basically, it just means how many enemy planes can you shoot down for every one that we lose. And so World War II, you're looking at maybe a 12-to-1 kill ratio where we are shooting down 12 enemy planes for every one of ours that we lose. It's unfortunate to lose any planes, but at the same time, that would be considered a very healthy kill ratio, meaning you're operating on the other side of the world. It's hard to get trained pilots over there. It's hard to get replacement aircraft over there. So you can sustain those types of operations for extended periods of time. In the Vietnam War in the late 1960s, when you see that our kill ratio had plummeted down to like 1 to 3, 1 to 4, now those are unsustainable losses. And so the Navy wanted to study that problem, put together a working team. And one of the recommendations, the primary recommendation that came out of that working team was the creation of the U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School, which everyone now popularly knows as Top Gun.
Well, you mentioned how you were fascinated by aviation as a kid, and then of course this movie on top of that. But if it were just aviation, you could have gone down the path of becoming an airline pilot, let's say a commercial pilot. So what drew you to the military specifically?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, right? If you look back throughout any of our lives, you have these interactions or these stories or things that you grow up with that make a huge impact. My father never served in the military, but my uncle did. My uncle had been drafted into the United States Army during Vietnam. He had some of the most amazing stories about his time on the ground in Vietnam, but also serving his country, right? So very patriotic. Similarly, as I was a kid in middle school going into high school, I was a part of an organization now called Scouting. Then it was called Boy Scouts of America. Rose up through the ranks, earned my Eagle Scout. But that whole path is geared toward public service, service to the community, putting others before yourself. And that was a message that really resonated with me. And as I got to know more and more about kind of what the military stood for, the ethos that each of the services tend to adhere to, very much the same thing. It's a nonpartisan institution. Doesn't matter, what's part of the political spectrum you fall in. It doesn't, none of that matters. What matters is you're serving your country, you're doing the job to help defend, and that can be hopefully for most of us during peacetime, but then for some like myself and others, serving during combat during wartime as well. So, I think those things really helped. And one of the things we always did every year to help raise money for our scout troop was to do a fundraiser at the Air Force Base. And you'd have either the Thunderbirds for the Air Force, you'd have the Blue Angels for the U.S. Navy fly and do their demonstrations. And that was just further kind of cementing that love of aviation and wanting to pursue that in particular as a career path going forward.
Did you see that recent documentary about the Blue Angels?
It's on my to-do list at some point, but I haven't actually watched it yet. But it looks
Okay.
great. In fact, the commanding officer of the Blue Angels, Brian Kesselring, was a Top Gun instructor at the same time I was. So we crossed paths a few years back.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to ask this question. And admittedly, this is a stupid question. It'll be the dumbest question you're going to have, I think, all interview. But to be a Blue Angel versus being a Top Gun cadet, which pilot is the more skilled pilot?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I'd say that they're kind of a subset. I think you could be a very good Blue Angel pilot, but not necessarily make it as a Top Gun instructor.
Hmm.
But I've seen several Top Gun instructors who go on later in their careers to, in this case, be the commanding officer or the CEO, if you will, for the Blue Angels. I think it's just because it's a very different skill set. I mean, the Blue Angels are phenomenal from a recruiting standpoint. They are, when you're not used to seeing aviation, let alone military aviation, and you're watching these jets do these intricate maneuvers, it seems like secret sauce. Like, there's how in the world did they pull this off? But the men and women who are flying these fighter jets on a daily basis are doing many of those same maneuvers day in and day out. It's just the way we piece them together for the
Hmm.
air show. So I think the Blue Angels have a very specific role to recruit, to
Yeah.
inspire men and women around the country to maybe consider naval aviation, whereas Top Gun is all about what we would say is like purely tactics. It's how do you become the very best fighter pilot you can be, and then subsequently learn how to teach that to others.
Yeah. Although I would venture to guess that the movie has done more to help recruit than the Blue Angels. That's based on a data set of nothing but just pure speculation. But I imagine you weren't the only kid to be fascinated with that movie and want to do something.
Well, it's fascinating. I remember the Navy, of course, like any large organization, tracks metrics and tracks things to
Mm.
determine performance. And one of the things they tracked was how much of a difference did they see in recruiting after the original movie. And the number that always gets quoted is over 100,000 more applicants that year than they would have in a traditional year. So,
Hmm.
and that wasn't just to become a Navy pilot, that was to do anything involving the US Navy. So, yeah, very, very good boon for recruiting. I think, those Top Gun movies were probably nice little shots in the arm for getting people just jazzed up about pursuing that as a career path. But then the Blue Angels probably do a nice job day in and day out when they fly air shows of inspiring, men and women around the country.
Well, so you get into the U.S. Naval Academy, which is incredibly difficult to get into, but not because of your grades, because the
Yeah.
grades, I believe, were lacking, but because of all the leadership. And you just addressed some of it: Boy Scouts, volunteer work in the community. But usually, I mean, I know people that have gone to the Naval Academy. You've got to have stellar grades as well. So, was that the exception to the norm?
Yeah, I think in my case, I probably lucked out, and it was. As you referenced, usually the prototypical midshipman who goes to the Naval Academy, just like going to West Point or the Air Force Academy, typically what you find is that they've got stellar grades, top 10% of their class, valedictorian, salutatorian, very good SAT scores, excellent at athletics, or something. They've got multiple hallmarks that stand out. My grades were, I would say, average, and my freshman and then kind of going into sophomore year of high school until I realized that I wanted to pursue the academy. Then I really turned it up and was able to demonstrate my junior year, like, hey, I can do this. I can operate at a high level with AP and honors classes. But I think just like you referenced, that was the thing that really stood out for the interviewers for the Naval Academy
Mm.
was the fact that I had not only risen to the rank of Eagle Scout, which is somewhat rare. I mean, it's not. I think it's 10-15% of people who join scouting get to the Eagle Scout level. But beyond that, we had done this high adventure camp for 2 weeks in middle of nowhere, New Mexico, called Philmont. And so I had been the trail leader for that. I was in charge of the adults and the scouts that went as part of my team. And I think that really, because they just kept hitting on that, like, tell us what you learned, tell us what
Yeah.
that experience was like. How did you grow from that experience? And so I'm just basically telling stories about that experience and what I felt like the difference it made for me. And you could just see them because they're taking scores as you talk, and they're all pegging it out at the max. I'm like, hey, this is this is going good. I'm happy with it. So, but I thought that really stood out to me was that they were looking for what they call the whole person concept, not just grades, not just
Mm.
sports, but more importantly, if we're trying to create leaders for life, both in uniform and out, then that's obviously something that they cared about for bringing someone into the academy as well.
Yeah. So I think to become a Top Gun instructor, you have to first be a Top Gun student. Is that right?
That is right. So
Okay.
typically they'll identify you early on if they think they want to keep you as an instructor. And so you're kind of earmarked for it, but you do have to go through the course. You have to be a Top Gun student, pass the program and pass it at a high level. And then if you do those things, then you can stay on as an instructor.
So was it pretty intimidating to be a student in that kind of environment?
Yeah, 100%. For me personally, it was even more intimidating because typically so you'll have your first tour of duty. You've gone through flight training. You've learned how to fly, in my case, a plane called the FA-18, the Hornet. We were just bringing a more advanced version called the Super Hornet online around that time. But typically, you've had a full 3 years in your squadron. You've had some operational experience overseas, flying from the deck of an aircraft carrier, and you have usually about 1,000 hours of flying time. And because I had gone to grad school before starting flight training, I was a little bit behind my peers. And the Navy was great. My squadron was great in trying to help me catch up. So they basically, I rose to where I needed to be from a performance level a little bit earlier than most. So around 2.5 years in, I was given the opportunity to apply to Top Gun. But I had fewer flight hours. I only had about 750 flight hours. So I only had about 3/4 of what someone would normally have. And now you're going in to fly against some of the best pilots that the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps have to offer. So yeah, it was not only impressive to see the cohort you're a part of, the instructors are top notch, and the beauty of the program is that they just really want you to focus on flying. They'll handle the administration, they'll handle meals, they'll take care of a lot of the things that you would normally have to do on a day-to-day basis, just so you can focus on pure performance day in and day out. And so it was very time intensive and a very stressful program, but again, that's by design to really see if you can make it through.
And going back to the movie, it made it seem like it was a very competitive environment. Everyone trying to prove themselves. There are points you accumulate. There's a winner given at the end. Is that all just sort of made up and it's actually a much more collegial kind of environment?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the two biggest things about the way they portray Top Gun that's completely false and fabricated is the point system, because there is no point system. And also like the love interest kind of stuff, like it's this boys club and everyone's running around partying and having a good time. And that's not the way it is. But there is no point system. You don't compete against each other outright. I mean, everyone knows in the back of their mind. I mean, you do get graded. So
Mhm.
you not only get graded pass fail for the flight, you also get what we call basically you have maybe a list of 10, 15, 20, 25 items throughout the flight, and you can be graded, above average, average, or below average. And so you could have maybe a slightly below average performance, but still pass, right? If you met all the bars. So in the back of your head, you know who is excelling and who's doing okay, and then
Mhm.
who's struggling a little bit. But unlike the movie, you'd find that if someone's struggling, everyone kind of rallies around that person to help them out, to want to say, "Hey, let's get back into the simulator, and we'll give you some of our time to help you, meet that threshold, meet that bar." It's a very cooperative and collaborative environment, and it's not at all, backstabbing or anything like that.
Hmm. Well, you said that to succeed at Top Gun, you've got to have three traits: talent, passion, and personality. And it feels to me like these are qualities that would be just table stakes to get into the program and to make it as a naval aviator in general, even outside of Top Gun. So was hoping you could maybe peel those back because I'm trying to understand, and I can tell you're very down to earth and grounded and modest, but I do want to understand what separates a Top Gun pilot from the rest out there.
Yeah. So as you just noted, it's talent, passion, personality is what we always talked about when we were evaluating someone to bring them to staff. The way I always break it down is, look, if you want to be a Top Gun instructor, your talent has to be at least average, preferably above average, right? Because you have to be credible. You have to, because the number one role for a Top Gun instructor isn't just to be one of the best fighter pilots, in the country, let alone possibly the world. It's you have a responsibility to teach. So you bring students through the course, you have to teach them, and then now you're going out and teaching other fighter pilots around the country in the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force. So you have to be credible, and the only way to do that is if you have at least average, if not above average talent. And that's walking in the door, right? I mean, as you referenced, as a Top Gun instructor, you definitely have to have above average talent.
But just to separate, and maybe
Yeah.
I'm getting confused with the nuance, but let's even say you're not an instructor. Just to get into Top Gun and to matriculate from that program, I assume you're at a different level than a typical naval aviator, right? Most of the Navy fighter pilots don't go through Top Gun.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think, one of the things we always teach at Top Gun is humility, because you could be great 3 days in a row, and on the fourth day, you really tank it. So, mistakes happen to everybody.
Mhm.
We have seen people who get nominated and we accept into the program who we think are above average, who actually walk in the door closer to the average level.
Hmm.
And what you find is that there's that 1, 2, 3 weeks at the beginning of just struggling and a little bit of they're hitting the panic button, but then they're faced with a choice. You can either triple down on your effort, pull out all the stops, do what it takes to succeed. And if you've got the capability and you do those two things, then hey, suddenly your ability does start to skyrocket and you've proven yourself. And so now you get a specific patch if you're a Top Gun graduate. So you've earned the right to wear that patch. As you see with any industry or any organization, you'll have people who come in and maybe they're challenged. And so you say, okay, well, here's what it's going to take to win, to succeed, to become an elite fighter pilot. And they kind of go, look, this is just too much. I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to do that. Or potentially they're not even capable of it. And so, you give them every effort, but yeah, we'll watch people out of the program if it's required. But that's the talent portion. The passion is important. And this probably starts breaking into a little bit of what we're chatting about, right? What differentiate a Top Gun instructor from just your average pilot. And I think a lot of it's the passion, because it is, it's not like a 9 to 5 civilian job. And it's not even like a normal military job. I mean, it's 6.5 days a week, as we would call it, because you're working Monday through Friday, typically showing up around 5:30 in the morning. You typically leave anywhere from 9:30 to 11:30 p.m. You get just enough time to slam some dinner down, grab 6 to 7 hours of sleep, and then you're repeating the cycle Monday through Friday. And then you've got to do at least a half day, if not a full day on Saturday, to catch up on the paperwork and things. So there's just a lot of things. You have to put your family, you have to put a lot of things to the side in order to perform at that level for us, an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the passion comes in. And I think that's the huge differentiator between those who want to pursue excellence and then those who maybe say that they do and they see what it requires and decide that's not the path for me. So that's passion. And then personality counts for so much, because you can be a supremely talented pilot. You can be someone who's very passionate about it. And of course, if you're thinking about the first movie, Iceman probably comes to mind, right? It's like super passionate, super talented, but just a jerk. And so that's something we talk about at the class a lot too, is, you can be talented, you can be passionate, but if you're a jerk, no one's going to want to listen to you. You're going to be ineffective as an instructor, and you certainly won't have a positive impact we need you to have and that you'd like to have.
It does seem like there's a fine line, just in general in life, between confidence and cockiness.
Yeah.
And I would think you have to get really, really close to that line, because there's no way you're handling these jets if you don't have a lot of conviction in yourself and your own abilities. So if it spills over into cockiness, and again, I know the movie probably exaggerated some of these characters, but I'm guessing there have been students to go in that thought a little too mildly of themselves, if you will. Are these people kicked out of the program?
I don't recall seeing someone kicked out for being overly cocky. I remember towards the tail end of my 2.5 years as a Top Gun instructor, we started, because we always say that the staff is like a pendulum, meaning the Top Gun staff. It's like you'll swing to, like, when I was first showing up, it was kind of and everyone's got their own flavor. For me, it was kind of the golden age. It was a lot of really talented instructors who were incredibly humble, didn't necessarily talk about themselves. It was just focus on the mission. How do we make the best students? How do we affect the biggest impact for, our community? And then while I was there, it was very enjoyable. And then after my class as a student, you started bringing some in who were fairly cocky, pretty arrogant. And if you think after my time as an instructor, I go back to the fleet, and now I'm teaching regular guys and gals about how to, elevate their game. I would always draw up on the whiteboard kind of like a bar chart. And I would just say, look, here, there is just like you pointed out, Glenn, I mean, there's a difference between competence and arrogance. competence in my mind is where, you have an excellent capability and you may recognize that, but you always operate at or below that level and preferably below it because you'd rather have someone else sing your praises instead of you singing your own praises. The flip side is when arrogance comes into play, when your competence is actually lower than you anticipate, but you're
Mm.
acting like you're way better.
Hmm.
And so I would always encourage them. I'm like, look, I mean, performance will speak for itself. And so you don't need, it's not like the NFL, for example, we just had opening weekend for the NFL season. And, you get a lot of these hot shot receivers or quarterbacks or whoever talking about how amazing they are and no one's faster, no one's better, whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, man, just stay far away from that. I mean, I know that that's kind of a little bit of what you see in American culture, but if you are calm, cool, collected, if you're humble, if you demonstrate humility, you recognize everybody has an off day, you will too. Just operate within your means. And then you typically find that you get a heck of a lot more respect with that type of personality than you do if you're running around trying to convince people how awesome you are. And the Navy SEALs are the same way.
In corporate America, cockiness often masks insecurity. So there might be an element of that as well. I would imagine once you're in a program like that, that you'd get humbled pretty quickly, one would think.
Yeah, you do. And I think you brought up a great point. And that was a transition that I had to make moving from uniform service to the private sector and working in the corporate environment. I do a lot of consulting work,
Hmm.
and I was actually surprised to see every organization is different. And I know you see this as well, but the organizations that tend to matriculate towards that elite part of the spectrum are the ones who are like they're incredibly competent. They work hard. They do what it takes to succeed. They're thinking strategically. They're planning long range, and they hold a high standard and hold everybody to it, including the bosses. They'll make a mistake and say, "Hey, I made a mistake. Here's what I learned from it. So I just wanted you to know so you don't repeat my mistakes." Conversely, a lot of the organizations I work with, which is different than the military experience I had, is not a lot of introspection, not a lot of, hey, we made a mistake, let's call it out and let's peel it apart to figure out what we can learn from it. And usually what I find is senior leaders are concerned about appearances, are very fearful of appearing to not be as good at or better than their subordinates. And that causes them to kind of bury those types of things. So that was something I found to be very different in the private sector than what I had experienced in the military. And I found fascinating, but of course it provides a lot of great opportunities to help teach those types of characteristics into organizations.
So back to the three traits: talent, passion, personality. They need to see this in someone to bring them into the program. So you already had some elements of these three to even get into Top Gun as a student,
Mm-hmm.
let alone an instructor. So as you look back, Guy, and you think about what was the one, and I'm not talking about like technical things you learned, aerial combat and that sort of thing, but from a leadership perspective, what was something you learned over the years you spent at Top Gun that, added to your leadership toolkit, if you will?
Yeah, let me give you two. So I was a very introverted kid growing up. I mean, I was just most comfortable keeping to myself. I wasn't a huge seeker of attention. I wasn't out there trying to do things just to call attention to myself. So, to kind of one of the things you're alluding to, personality, right? To be an effective teacher, to be someone who can rally support, who can demonstrate, like, hey, this is the leader you want to follow. You do have to put yourself out there. And initially, that was very uncomfortable for me. I remember getting up in front of my, students or in front of the instructors when I was a student, especially the first few briefs. And I'm actually like, my temples are a little bit red and I'm sweating because I'm just
Hmm.
so nervous about getting up and having to perform at that level in a public setting in front of a lot of people. And then, like a lot of things in life, right? It's you do that a few times, you force yourself to become comfortable with it, and so you can kind of check that off the box. And of course, now it's paid itself forward because I can get up in front of a ballroom of like 2,500 people, and it's not that big of a deal because you've learned how to tackle those types of things. So I think one, putting yourself out there, being willing to express who you truly are, being comfortable with that, and being comfortable being observed in large group settings was a thing I learned. The other thing that I think really made a difference for me when I was going through Top Gun as a student, but more importantly as an instructor, was just aggressiveness, like targeted, and constrained aggressiveness. And by that I mean you can of course be super aggressive and do it in a very bad way that either brings dishonor to the organization, to yourself. I mean, you could see this in sales or anything else, right? Where if you just go crazy, like Enron back in the day, we need performance, or we'll just cook the books to get performance. It's like, well, that's not the right answer. But it really did teach me that, you can achieve almost anything you put your mind to as long as you're willing to just break down the problem and put the resources against it to solve it. And I found it to be a very powerful thing because I used it throughout the rest of my military career. I used it during my time in the presidential administration. I used it afterward as I'm, consulting and doing work for others, right? So I think that was a very powerful lesson. Was sometimes you can fall into a rut. You can feel like this is the lane I'm supposed to swim in, and I can't really break out of this rut. And it's like, no, you can, but you also have to realize that there's going to be a lot of hard work and dedication that goes into it, and that's going to require maximum effort on your part for some period of time until you can break into the swim lane you want.
Something I read about that really fascinated me is it's standard practice at Top Gun to do a debrief after a simulated dogfight exercise to discuss what happened, lessons learned, etc., to break it down, as you put it
Yeah.
earlier. And during that debrief, you compare your recollection of the facts with the aircraft video that actually captured the entire thing. Reason being that our memories and our perceptions aren't always reliable. So when you were back to being a student going through the program and going through these debriefs, did you often find that there was a pretty big discrepancy between the two?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And but it makes you feel good too, because the way the process would work, we'd use a whiteboard for a lot of stuff. Even though we have advanced technology, we would still go kind of back to the basics. And so
Mhm.
the student would get up, and when I was a student, I would get up and I would recreate the battle using, white or wet erase marker and arrows. And so
Mhm.
you create the battle. Your instructor would say, okay, my notes or my recollection is actually here, here, here. He would change it or she would change it to make it what they recalled, right? And theirs is going to typically be better than yours because they're trained for it.
Mhm.
And then both of you say, okay, let's go to the tapes, right? Now you watch the replay. And so sometimes, you could get fairly close, but you're always, I mean, there's so many nuances, and there's ways that the aircraft maneuvers or the thing you commanded the aircraft to do that you weren't even aware of at the time. Because you have to, sometimes when you're dogfighting in particular, you have to contort yourself in the jet. I mean, you're not just sitting there flying the jet staring straight ahead. I mean, you might have the enemy directly behind you. And so you've got to twist yourself like a pretzel in that cockpit to look directly behind your jet while you're still flying forward. And so all those things will affect your perception. But the cool thing about it, like any career path, is that that's how life works, right? There's where you are today, there's where you want to be, there's a delta there, and then you apply training and resources and everything you need to then create that feedback loop to train, and you close that gap a little bit more, and then you do the same thing the next day and
Mhm.
you close that gap, and it keeps closing. And so by the time I was maybe towards the tail end of my time as an instructor, you could have, and all the instructors, I mean, you could have really good, we call it recall, so you'd have really good recall post fight. You could get up there, get it 85 to 95% correct, and then watch the tapes and it'd back you up. And to your point, I mean, that just adds to this kind of ethos and this view that Top Gun instructors are really good. And it's because all that hard work is happening in the background,
Yeah.
that the students don't normally see. But then you get up there and you perform like that, and then you watch the tape and the tape aligns with what you're saying. And the students can sit there and go like, man, like I've got light years to grow.
Yeah.
And you say, yeah, and I was in your shoes a few short years ago, and I got here, you can too. And so you start bringing them down that path.
And would you find that there was any sort of consistent pattern in either recalling details that skew favorably or unfavorably, or does it even depend on someone's personality?
Yeah. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes personality might, especially if someone's ego was maybe a little bit larger coming into the class as a
Mhm.
student. You might want to whitewash something. You might want to, try to build it up that it wasn't as bad as it was. And of course, that's the beauty of going to the tapes. You're like, okay, that's what you thought. Here's what I thought, and then let's watch the tapes. And again, the tape will prove the point. And I'll never forget. I mean, before I was a Top Gun student, I'm still just flying I was probably maybe a year into my time as a fighter pilot in general. And I'm getting ready to deploy to go to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom. We're doing training in the desert, Nevada. And we're doing this big battle between about four of us and about 10 bad guys. Everything's simulated, of course, but you're shooting missiles, you're shooting your guns, you're doing your mission. And we land, and as part of the debrief, it comes out, they're like, hey, it's called essentially friendly fire, right? It's like
Mhm.
my call sign was bus. I can't remember what my flight call sign was, but they would say, Viper One, had blue on blue, took a shot on their fellow wingman and wound up killing their wingman. And you're like, there's no way. Like that never happened. Because in your head, like when you're replaying it, you're like, there's no way I shot the wrong guy. And then you go back over to the simulator, you load your tape, and sure enough, targeted the wrong aircraft, misread the symbology, and took a shot on the wrong aircraft. And in
Oops.
real life, yeah, real life, whoops, you would have potentially killed one of your wingmen. So, I think that was probably the one time that I had my chain jerked pretty hard, and it was for good reason. And it's
Mm.
kind of like, hey, new guy, shut your mouth and listen up because here comes the truth.
Hmm.
So, um, but again, I think that's a big part of just finding success is understanding that we all make mistakes. Look for those sources of truth data, find ways to get to the facts, and then learn from it and commit to doing better the next day.
Yeah. So another principle you talk about is staying calm under pressure. And you got to experience this firsthand when your engine caught on fire. Could you share that story?
Sure. So this is actually, once again, this is when I'm actually just a student naval
Hmm.
aviator. That's when I'm learning to fly the F-18. So I've gone through about a year of basic flight training, but I haven't, been flying fighter jets for more than just a few months. So here I am, a relatively new pilot. We had just started doing the dogfighting phase, flying the F-18. I'm going out with a very seasoned instructor. We're in this over Death Valley in California, so a lot of mountainous terrain around us, and we are dogfighting. And he's, I'm the student, so I'm about to get my butt kicked, and he's pulling around with his aircraft. I could see him back behind me, getting ready to take a shot. And right about that moment, as I'm looking behind me, the whole jet just thumps very violently. And so you're like, wow, what was that? Because it shouldn't have been jet wash because I wasn't around any other planes, and he's behind me, so I didn't fly through his jet wash. And as your brain is just trying to process what that was, suddenly the headset comes alive. And we had this, female voice, we called her Bitch and Betty. And so she's, saying engine fire right, engine fire right. And that, of course, gets your head back into the cockpit. You're looking, you see the red light saying you've got a right engine fire. And then now you look down at your engine instrument display, and the engine, which normally is spinning around 10,000 RPM and should have been still spinning, is zero. Like it immediately seized and locked up. So now you go through your immediate action procedures, and there's five or six involved with this one in particular, where you have to shut off the flow of fuel to the engine. You have to discharge the fire extinguisher into that engine. You have to lower your tail hook because you might have to take an arrested landing. All these different things come into play. But we're losing altitude because it's a hot summer day, humid outside. The performance of the jet's not going to be top notch. You're at high altitude. All these things are lining up. So I'm just constantly losing altitude. We had to divert to another airfield in the vicinity called China Lake. And so we went to Naval Air Station China Lake, called for the emergency landing. They let me do what's called an arrested landing, like you would on an aircraft carrier, where my tail hook, the back of the jet's hanging down. They have a wire that they raised across the runway. I catch that wire, brings me to a halt. Instead of, rolling out for 3,000 feet, it stops you at about 100, 150 feet. As soon as I land, shut down the jet, fire truck's already there. They spray foam and stuff on the engine. And after all that stuff had been washed away, I climb off or climb out of the aircraft,
Mhm.
walk around, spin the engine. It just sounds like a can of marbles inside of there. And you come to find out that someone had left a rag in the engine, hadn't done their job right. But to your point, you asked about staying calm under pressure. That was a very significant moment early in my career, where you had a life or death situation, and you realize kind of two things. One, you have to stay calm under pressure, because if you overreact, you're likely to make a bad decision. And one of the best ways, so I guess the question becomes, well, then so what? And the so what is, it's that training that happens before the emergency ever occurs. It's being forward thinking. That's why we get in the simulator. That's why we throw curveballs to each other and say, okay, what do you do if your oil pressure goes to zero? What do you do if your landing gear won't come down? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And you just go through all these different scenarios that hopefully you never face. But if you were to face those scenarios, it could be a life or death situation, right? And so you face it in the simulator with the thought being, and like I experienced myself, if you witness this or experience this in real life, you're much better prepared to handle it than if you're seeing it for the very first time.
So I guess one of the questions here is, and maybe you sort of partially answered it, which is how does one develop that muscle? How much of it is based on all these simulations and all the scenario planning versus someone's just natural disposition is to be somewhat calm under pressure? I'm sure we all have friends, coworkers, etc., right, who ride up and down. You can see their emotions on their sleeves. So is this something that you just were always naturally wired this way, or do you feel like you were able to actually change the way you might have typically responded to crisis situations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a big part of that like you said, it's twofold. When you think about people who excel at sports, people who excel at their particular career path, they're going to exhibit those traits naturally, right? So I've been around aviators and pilots who don't handle stress well, and they don't last in the program very long. We had one pilot that I flew with in my very first career kind of landing spot before I became a Top Gun student, and that individual was taxiing to the runway with an older instructor, and just the fact of taxiing to the runway and trying to stay close to other planes stressed him out so much that he was unwilling to take off and never flew again. It was a complete loss of confidence, and just kind of said, hey, I can't do it. It was kind of like the first movie with Cougar, right? When something shakes him up so bad, and it's like, I'm turning in my wings and I can't fly anymore. So this is the first movie. They have the very first kind of confrontation with the MiGs, and Cougar's like breathing heavily, takes his oxygen mask off, can't see straight.
Yeah.
Picture of his wife and kids, right? He's barely able to get back to the carrier, barely able to land. And afterwards, that's when he goes into the commanding officer and says, hey, I think the quote was something along the lines of like, hey, sir, I've lost the edge. I'm turning in my wings. I'm not going to be going to Top Gun. And that's what allows Maverick to go to Top Gun. I will say that, throughout, if I think about my 20-year career as a fighter pilot, there were certainly times where something shakes you up or something happens that just really yanks your chain, and you kind of find yourself going like, my goodness, like, should I, can I, do I want to keep doing this? And again, I think there's always those individuals who are faced with that, and it's a kind of a yes, no decision. Yes, are you going to redouble your efforts, realize that mistakes happen, and so you just keep on trucking, or are you going to be the person who says, hey, I got to pull the ripcord and I'm no longer in a position to do this anymore? So that happens, but never saw that at Top Gun with either a student or an instructor. I think once you've made it that far, once you're brought into a program like Top Gun, then you've been fully vetted, and typically, especially as an instructor, you're going to be fully vetted and make it all the way through.
I think it was unpacking one of these incidents, either the fire or another one training Jordanian pilots, where you quoted President Eisenhower, and the quote is, "Plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable." So, meaning what?
Basically, you can think about so many times in your life that you come up with a plan. And the other quote that's corollary to that is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. And that could be you're in the military, and you're about to go into war, and something's going to change. And the plan you came up with, that is this beautiful, wrapped, exquisite plan, falls apart almost immediately. Happens in life too, right? Road trips or college application. I mean, it could be anything in your career path. And the reality is why planning becomes indispensable is that it's the act of thinking strategically. It's the act of being able to teach yourself to look around corners, to say, okay, here's what I desire to achieve. This is my desired end result. Okay, so where am I now? What are the resources available? What's the state of play? What are those intermediate steps to get me there? And then the next step is to say, okay, well, what if? Or what if something else happens? Or what's the challenge that might arise, from most probable to least probable? And We do this every flight. We call it a risk assessment code. You kind of list out the things that could happen that would be negative for flight performance, and you kind of assign it this code of, hey, is it very likely to happen or not likely to happen? And then you correspondingly say, okay, is this incredibly severe if it did happen, or is it not severe at all? So, of course, the things you have to make sure you address is if it's very severe and it's likely to happen, then you better be prepared for it. So that's where Eisenhower's really getting at. Planning is indispensable because, look, you can have a plan, but if you don't understand how to plan rapidly, how to be able to adapt to change or adapt to challenges, then a plan itself is worthless.
Interesting. I want to go back. There's something I skipped over. I
Yeah.
want to go back to Top Gun when you first became an instructor. And this was absolutely fascinating to me. One of the things you have to do is master what they call a murder board.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a process of having to recite a 4-hour and 230-page lecture that you'd be teaching the students by heart. I mean, by heart. You cannot refer to any notes, can't look at your PowerPoint. So, I don't know, memorizing a 4-hour lecture feels excessive. It's beyond knowing the materials. It's just having, brute force to memorize that much. I'm sure there must be some lesson behind this. Why was that so important? Why was that so critical to instructing there?
Well, I think it goes back to what's underpinned our entire conversation, right? It's that ethos of what does it take to be a member of an elite team? And a lot of times, I'll put it this way. I've in this private sector, working with corporations, without fail, 100% of organizations are like, we're awesome and we're elite. Well, that's impossible, right? Like if everyone's elite, then no one's elite. So, realistically speaking, 10 to 15% of the organizations you interact with are truly elite organizations. They learn from their lessons. They do all the hard work and the things that you would want an organization to do to succeed. And usually they do it without a lot of fanfare. So at Top Gun, I think when you understand that that's just the ethos of the organization, well, this is yet another way to prove that. It's not flying. Now it's something a little bit more cerebral. It's instructor based. It's teaching, which is a core critical skill for us. And we're going to give you something that seems entirely insurmountable. And that's the way I characterize it in my book. I was like, man, when I got handed my lecture, like you just mentioned, 4.5 hours total time, 5 different parts to this lecture. And I'm sitting there going, there is no way, because I'm not great at memorization. There's no way I'm going to pass, this whole murder board process. And I'll never forget so basically what happens is you get 8 practice sessions with Top Gun instructors, usually 3 or 4 at a time. They're called pre-boards. So you get 8 pre-boards and then you get your murder board. Pre-board number 1, walk in the room, 3, 4 Top Gun instructors, three for the pre-board one for me. And you start going through, and I think I maybe made it 15 minutes before I'd exhausted my memory bank. And I'm looking backwards at the slides. I'm cheating by kind of glancing at the computer screen in front of me. And the Top Gun instructors are catching every single bit of that, right? Because they've got 8.5 by 11 copy sheets in front of them, right? But they've got like this little matrix on them. And so it's just, each page has probably about 50 to 60 lines on it. And the box on the left will say slide, and the box on the right says note. And every one of your slides as you go through the pre-board is numbered. And so they're just catching every little thing you do. So it might be like slide 3, slide peak, slide 4, you misspoke, slide 5, you said and ah twice. They're catching everything. And we take a quick break after I'm done with my 4.5 hours. I grab a soda and a candy bar just to recharge and kind of shake it out, come back in, and I'm just dejected because I'm like, well, I just tanked that. And sure enough, go through all this debrief. The debrief itself took about another 2.5 hours, just going through every little thing. And like I recount in the book, I'll never forget, I got pulled aside by an instructor named Bo Locke. And he just pulls me aside. Hey, man, how you doing? I said, I'm feeling kind of rough. And he's like, hey, 2 things. Number 1, don't forget, like every single one of us who are an instructor, we've made it through this process, right? We've done it. You can do it. So just have confidence. Number 2 is you're trying to do everything all at once. You're trying to basically memorize 4.5 hours and bring it all here. And that's going to be pretty much impossible for anybody. So his recommendation that I liked and I used was to break it down. He's like, memorize part 1, know it like the back of your hand, let parts 2 through 5 kind of go for your next pre-board, but just memorize part 1 and be very confident with that knowledge. And then once you've proven to yourself you can do that, we'll then start expanding into part 2 and then practice part 1 and 2 verbatim, right? And so you just kind of grow it that way. And it worked wonders for me, I think largely because of the confidence factor. It was, okay, this is doable. And like a lot of things in life, once you find the confidence, then suddenly something in your brain unlocks and says, oh, okay, well, if I can do part 1, I can do part 1 through 5, no problem.
Do you mind if I play devil's advocate?
Sure.
Do you think in your heart of hearts that memorizing that 4.5 hour lecture made you a more effective, a more impactful teacher?
I like that question because it forces some introspection. I think the easy answer and the institutional answer is yes, because, and that's the dangerous part of the answer, right? It's because it's kind of like that. If it worked for me, it must be the right thing. But so the reason why, and as you talk about it as an instructor, once you've passed it, you kind of have now as you're going through the process, you're not really allowed to question it too much. I mean, you can say, well, why are we doing this? This is silly. But once you've earned your stripes, then you can kind of question it and people will have a really good discussion with you about it. And there's two things. Number one, there was a consultant group that had come through years before. We're talking maybe 10, 15 years before, and had given the Top Gun staff some key principles to help cement the fleet's perspective of Top Gun, right? Part of it was you don't wear flight suits like the students wear flight suits. You wear your dress uniform, or you wear a more formal uniform and they wear flight suits. And that helps to kind of helps to facilitate the I'm the instructor, you're the student. Same thing with a lot of things we do through staff. And one of the things that didn't come directly from the consultants, but was kind of hinted to, and that's in the Top Gun stuff run with is, hey, you're going to memorize this whole thing. And I'll tell you, like, there are very few times in my life where I've known the material backwards, forwards, insides, and out. I was running simulations to test every hypothesis. Everything I was teaching, I was testing because it had to survive contact with the more senior instructors, right? So you knew if you're going to get up there, not only did you have to know it incredibly well, but you had to understand the rationale because you were going to be asked, hey, you said this. Well, why? Why that? Why did you tell me the answer is 25? And so you'd have to walk through everything behind it. And so again, is it the right fit for every organization? No, absolutely not. But for what you were trying to achieve at Top Gun by basically ensuring that the instructors who met the mark are some of the best fighter pilot instructors / instructors around the country. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to look at that process and say, yeah, these people don't know what they're talking about. It's like, no, they know it. They know it all the way through.
It's interesting because there's this other tenet that you had mentioned in terms of succeeding at Top Gun. And it's this philosophy, which essentially is that perfection isn't really attainable. It's an elusive goal. So really the focus should be on just getting better each day. Be better than the day prior. It's continuous improvement, if you will. Whereas here it feels like there's some kind of arbitrary perfection standard that they're trying to get. They could measure as, let's see how he starts out, day 1, lecture 1, and let's see how he progresses each class. Let's have students, rank the professors over the course, of a class. And let's see that there's at least directional improvement, which is just, by the way, I'm not suggesting that this should be the way. It was just something that was interesting to me in terms of that being a standard that they created for these teachers. Because clearly you already showed a lot of resilience and stick-to-itiveness and everything else you had to do just going through the program as a student.
Oh, and don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Whenever I had my murder board, of course, it's a moment in time I'll never forget because like we're just talking about all the prep that went into it. But yeah, I made some mistakes. I mean, I'm teaching for 4.5 hours, some misstatements. I peeked at the slides a couple of times. Like that happened in the 4.5 hour brief. So don't get me wrong. It's not that you made it through your assigned topic, having memorized every single word perfectly with the right diction. You never said and on. You never looked at your slides or the keyboard because you're right. That would probably be an incredibly difficult goal for anybody to achieve. But I do think that it goes back to what you just stated. I think it was look where Guy started out in pre-board 1. Look where he ended up with his murder board. He got almost through the entire thing. Hey, you tried to explain something here. It wasn't quite clear, but that's a note, and we're going to debrief it to you during your murder board debrief. Conversely, we did have, and you'd see your basically instructors were ready by the time they hit the murder board. And we had a few during my time there, right? They're already instructors. It's not like they're a student trying to become an instructor. They're already an instructor just like the rest of us. They just haven't passed their murder board yet. And we had some who just didn't meet the bar. It was pretty obvious as you went through because they didn't either know the material very well or it just couldn't teach it effectively. And so you give them incredibly constructive feedback and say, hey, we're going to give you 2 more pre-boards and then we'll see you again in 2 months. And then they would make it the second time type of thing because they would just keep pouring that effort in. So I think that really it's probably twofold if you peel it back. It's probably the mythology of Top Gun. You're reinforcing it with this seemingly insurmountable task that only instructors have to go through. And then the second part of that too is probably once again, it's an internal test of I don't think loyalty is the right word, but basically like how bad do you want it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of like I referenced NFL earlier. It's kind of like any elite team. It's like, hey, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of off ramps between here and there. 98% of people are going to take those. And that's okay. Everyone kind of finds their right position. But for those who really, truly want to operate at that type of level, are you willing to do everything it takes to get there?
Yeah, it's not the perfect analogy, but it's like Bud's training. Because I've interviewed, at least 2 or 3 former Navy SEALs, and it's the same thing. Which there are a lot of exercises, but you're never going to necessarily encounter those specific scenarios in real life. But it's just about how bad you want it and how much torture are you willing to endure.
Resilience.
In that case, resilience. So I never realized that Top Gun has this organizational structure that's somewhat antithetical to the rest of the military. So Top Gun, as you outlined, if I understand it, is pretty flat structure, whereby junior officers are actually calling a lot of the shots. So they removed a lot of this hierarchy that's found elsewhere. So I guess for starters, if I got that right, why is that? Why is that so important at Top Gun versus other parts of the military?
Yeah, I mean, the military in general is a very hierarchical organization, right? You've got your commanding officer who's very much like your CEO. You have an executive officer, at least in the Navy and the Marine Corps. You have an executive officer that's kind of like your chief operating officer, right? They're making sure all the machinery is working day in and day out. You have a rank structure for department heads. That's kind of like your maybe junior C-suite or your kind of vice presidents. And then you've got all the rank and file. That's a typical squadron structure. And for most military services, that's the way it kind of looks. It's kind of like shaped like a triangle, like most organizations. Top Gun, we always called it inverting the triangle. So yes, you have a Top Gun commanding officer. This is a person who's been in the Navy for going on 20 years. They've proven themselves as a commanding officer of another actual combat unit or a unit that deploys overseas. And they're being brought back to Top Gun, typically after having been an instructor. But their role is largely to run interference, we would call it, to kind of keep all the administrative things, all the very big picture strategic things that Top Gun has to do off the backs of the students. So they represent the institution for admirals. They represent the institution for large organizations. The lieutenants and the Marine Corps captains, which is the same level of rank just on the Marine Corps. So the lieutenants and the captains are the ones who run the show. I mean, and as you gain seniority, meaning if you've only been on Top Gun for 6 months, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. If you've been there for 2.5, 3 years, you're at the top of that totem pole. But the rank structure is very flat. And I think a lot of that's just to make sure, again, it's about service first. It's about service before self. It's about how do you get to the very best tactical end result or the best product at the end of the day. And you don't do that by hanging too much onto the authority conferred by rank. You do it based on capability. You do it based on knowledge base. And so all those things matter a heck of a lot more, especially in a flat organization, than just saying, hey, this person's been in the Navy for 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, completely makes sense. Probably a lot easier for a newbie to adapt to than a military veteran who's used to that hierarchy and probably enjoys having some of that hierarchy and structure and top down, if you will. So I want to switch gears. You left all of this behind. You became the head speechwriter for former Secretary of Defense James Mattis.
Yep.
This is during the Trump administration. So feels like night and day from teaching aerial combat. What? How did you get to that? What motivated you? What was interesting about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like a lot of times in our lives, the opportunities that come about can be they feel like they're completely random. They may not be, but sometimes they feel that way. And I had left. I'd been stationed in Japan for my first tour of duty there. I was kind of a mid-level officer. This was after I'd been a Top Gun instructor. I had just gone back to, we call it the fleet, right? So back to the main U.S. Navy components. I'm flying overseas in Japan. I'm a middle-level person in a squadron, and I really wanted to go to a program called the White House Fellowship, and so I was running on that. Ultimately, made it to the finalist selection process, didn't get selected. And so now they're like, okay, we're going to send you to a place called the Naval War College. It's up in Newport, Rhode Island. And hey, they're like, it's great. It's a chance for a master's degree. It's a chance for X, Y, and Z. I'm like, I've already done the War College. I did that in a non-resident status, via correspondence during my first tour. Isn't that my record? They're like, oh yeah, sure is. Well, we're going to send you there anyway. And I'm thinking, my goodness, like, that insert any military joke you've heard about how it's inefficient, right? It's like, you've done it. Well, we'll have you do it a second time. Wound up being this incredible opportunity. So I go, had already kind of gone through it once. Now I'm going through it for a second time. I'm excelling academically. I'm winning some awards for writing, essays and papers and that kind of stuff for competitions. And come to find out, around that same period of time as I'm getting ready to graduate, the head of the United States Navy is firing his speechwriter, and he's looking for a replacement. And so I go and interview. Several of us kind of make that finalist process, and he selects me. So that was, unbeknownst to me, that's your check in the box that you know how to be a speechwriter, and now you're writing testimony for Congress. You're doing all sorts of stuff at that level. I go off. I become a commanding officer in my own right in Japan for the second time around. Come back to the United States. I've only been back in the U.S. for 3 to 4 months. I'm working for an admiral, and I get a personal phone call from a retired three-star admiral, and he's like, "Hey, Secretary Mattis needs someone to be his head speechwriter. It'll be a team of more than just you this time. Are you interested?" And Mattis, to a lot of us wearing the uniform, was kind of a hero figure, quite frankly, to put it like it is. And so I'm sitting there going like, wow, my family just moved back from Japan. We're exhausted, but heck yeah, this is a once in a lifetime thing. So I said, sure. And went up and interviewed for it. He selected me for it and was off to the races at that point. Did about 18 to 20 months with him on his staff.
Wow. During a very, very interesting time, to say the least. So I would say the ability to effectively communicate is one of the most critical skills for any leader. What did you learn about the art of communicating from the job, in that seat, that you didn't know going in?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I would certainly say effective communication for senior leaders, executive leaders, is critically important, because you could be brilliant at your craft, but if you can't inspire others or get the organization pointed in the right direction, then you're not going to be effective as a senior leader. So I agree with that point for sure. I think what it really taught me the first time around was, I feel bad for my boss, the head of the Navy, because I'm learning on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had to learn very quickly was that basically the ABCs of speech writing, the ABCs of effective communication, and very simply boiled down, it's, who are you, right? Who are you writing for in this case? But what is your role? What is your lane that you own? Maybe you own the U.S. Navy. That's going to be different than Mattis, who owned the entire United States military, 3 million men and women, almost $1 trillion a year budget, operations around the globe day in and day out, right? So what's your perspective? What is your platform? The second thing would be, who's your audience? And the third thing being the message you want to convey. And so that was what was great about that experience, is that it really forced you to do that kind of loop and do it very quickly, because my boss, either one of them might have 5 events in a single week where they're speaking publicly. It might be 2 times to Congress, 1 time to the Asian American Pacific Islander Association about, diversity and what's happening within the Navy on that front. Then you might be going to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and speaking to the Navy League, right? So it's like all over the map, and you had to be able to align your boss with the audience and the desired message and figure out a way to do that very quickly. So I think that's that's kind of the core skill set that came from that. And it's relevant to your question because, of course, that's what senior leaders have to do on an ongoing basis. If you're going to go and talk to your sales team, that's probably going to be different than your operations team, which is going to be different than if you're speaking externally or to your board of directors, right? You have to know what they care about and then what's the most effective way to get the desired end result with those different constituencies.
Well, Mattis, as you put it, was this highly decorated four-star general, highly respected. And coming out of the military, which of course is all about discipline and structure and process. And I'm not trying to get into politics here, but those three things are not what former President Trump was exactly known for.
Mm-hmm.
So that must have made it pretty challenging for him to work with a somewhat, I'm trying to be careful with my words, but a somewhat impulsive leader like that, let's say, which must have made your job pretty challenging on top of that because the goal keeps moving. How did you navigate all that?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a difference between politics and leadership styles, for example. There's no doubt anybody who's ever observed them. I mean, you could be a fan or you could be a detractor, but as you related, kind of an unstable leadership style, even his team would call it kind of chaotic. And you could say, well, hey, he's a change agent, and so that's by design. You might say that, there could be a possible rationale behind it, but the reality is that it made any team, not just Mattis's job or my job, but made any team working with the White House. It made their life incredibly difficult because examples that happen to us frequently would be Mattis would go meet with President Trump. They would agree on a policy position and a way ahead. And literally 30 minutes after Mattis got back and told us this is what we're doing, a tweet would come out and it would completely upend everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're panicking, and I say panicking loosely, but
Yeah.
what a leader like Trump doesn't necessarily understand is that when so he grew up and for basically his entire career, he ran a family business, right? It's a very close, intimate style of leadership. You can turn to your son or your daughter or your executive vice president and say, here's what I'd like to do. And it's going to affect like 4 or 5 people and within the organization. And then now you're going outside the organization and you're doing the work. When you're the head of the executive branch of the United States government, millions of people can be involved, especially in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And not only your nation, but now you're trying to work with members of Congress, both the House and the Senate. You're trying to work with your allies and partners overseas. You're trying to message to your adversaries or potential adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. There's a lot of work and coordination that goes into being successful. And if you're changing the sheet of music, every 30 minutes, hour, every week, you can't get everybody aligned. And so what that really winds up meaning is you're very ineffective because it's just not going to work the best way. So I think that's what, that was the experience. The way we tried to deal with it is like I've seen other military leaders do it. So I know Mattis's playbook, right? It was to basically digest, this is what the president is trying to achieve strategically. The manner in which he wants to achieve it is probably not the best path, and we'll let that kind of go by the wayside. But I have your marching orders with what you'd like to try and achieve. Let's go and put in place the right way to make that happen. And 70% to 80% of the time, we were able to kind of pull that off. Walking out of the door after that experience, I think it's just reinforced the importance of good leadership. Understanding what's at play, understanding who's on your team, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and then being able to put those resources in action in a way that is going to be the most effective. And especially when you're thinking about, for the direction of the country or, if you're part of a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company, I mean, there's a lot of people involved with those organizations too, right? And so you have to be not only effective, but hopefully efficient with your resources.
Yeah. Well, working that closely with James Mattis over that period of time, what did you learn most from him directly about leadership? Not necessarily anything he said to you, but just watching, observing, and absorbing, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think what's fascinating is I mentioned earlier that the military is nonpartisan. in that you're going to work just as hard for a Republican president as you would a Democratic president or anybody in between. So it is a nonpartisan institution, which I think every American should be thrilled about. It's not a apolitical institution. I mean,
Hmm.
politics involved to get to rise up to the ranks. And I think the thing that, I'd worked with a senior Navy leader before, but he had been from a submarine background, more introverted, very engineering focused, very kind of by the book. I think Mattis was the first guy where you kind of saw the politics at play to get where he was, not only as a four-star general in the Marine Corps, but then subsequently Secretary of Defense. And now you're working at those political levels, the highest levels for U.S. government. And so you're really seeing a lot of the politics at play. And I think what I learned, and this wasn't always his strong suit, but I think once again, it was just one of those, you can experience something that's not great, but then it reinforces a good lesson. And so where I felt Mattis was actually deficient a lot of times was he didn't take great care of his people. He would burn the candle on both ends himself. I mean, he was a very diligent, hard worker. He put in tons of time to try to get the job right. And because of his background as a four-star Marine Corps general, he demanded that of everyone around him. But we had so many people who were leaving our staff or leaving, staffs in close proximity to us where he could have very easily taken care of them and helped them on to their next job. And it was more along the lines of like, oh, you don't want to be here anymore? Well, then, best of luck to you. And then behind the scenes, sometimes would try and, tank their pathway. And I just remember walking away from that going like, yikes. Like that was antithetical to my Top Gun experience. The Top Gun experience was you leave it all on the field, right?
Hmm.
You pour out your heart and soul. You do everything you can to be the very best you can, especially in an organization like that to make the organization successful. But the unwritten contract always is for workers like that, hey, whenever your time comes, whether it's because you need to move on for your own self-interest or
Hmm.
it's just your time, because in the military you always rotate. Hey, I'm gonna bend over backwards to make sure that I can help you find a great place to land, because that's kind of how you're not even paying it forward, you're paying it backwards in that case. But that's and then that they're going to continue to rise through the ranks and they're going to do the same for those behind them. So I think that's what I walked away with, was just the recognition that, when you are a senior leader, it can sometimes become very easy to just be focused on either yourself or, the institution to the exclusion of those who actually make the organization successful. And so that's what you have to constantly remember to do, is to highlight your high performers and make sure that you're taking care of them as well, because you want to perpetuate and you want to signal to the organization that that's what gets rewarded.
Hmm. The name of this podcast is The Art of Excellence. And you've listened, I think, to a couple episodes. I always end it with asking my guest to define the word excellence. What do you think of when you think of that word?
Yeah, when I think of excellence, I guess there's a couple key tenets that go along with it. Number one is, it's that level you're trying to achieve. So it could be independent, it could be very unique to your job or your skill set or something that you are pursuing. But, in my case, for example, I just started cycling about 6 months ago.
Hmm.
And like probably anybody picking up a new sport or a new, athletic pursuit, wasn't great the first time, a few times to go out. I'm struggling. Climbing up hills is incredibly difficult. And I'm finding myself going like, man, this is not as easy as it was when I was a kid. But I set a pretty early goal. I'm like, man, I want to be able to do 20 miles per hour on average during like a 20+ mile course. And I'm not there yet. But that to me is like my threshold of, near term or maybe midterm success. So to me, it's like you got to set that goal that's maybe towards the border of what you can reasonably achieve, but it's out there, right? So it is a above average goal, because otherwise it wouldn't be excellent. And I think the rest of it kind of goes back to everything we've talked about. It's that resilience. It's that you are focused like a laser on that goal. There might be distractors, there might be setbacks or things that pop in your way, but you're going to be, tearing down the barriers to get to that goal. And so in my case, like, hey, it's not easy to bypass junk food. It's not been easy to like wake up when it's cold outside and jump on the bike and go ride. But that's my goal. I want to hit something that, especially at the age of 48, would probably be seen as like, yeah, that's pretty excellent. Uh,
Hmm.
and so figuring out the way to get there and do that. So I think those are the two probably critical keys to me is you're setting a goal that genuinely is above average. And then you are putting all the resources available to you behind that goal to achieve it. And you're willing to feed back into it.
Yeah. I think you will find that it is slightly easier to get to 20 miles per hour on a bike for 20 miles than it is to memorize a 4.5 hour lecture. Let's see if that ends up proving correct. This was this was a blast. Guy, thank you. This is what a career. And I know it's probably not anywhere near over, but thank you so much for spending all this time with me. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I appreciate the excellent questions. And being like you mentioned, Navy SEALs, Top Gun instructors, anybody out there who has pursued something that's challenging, they love sharing what they've learned. So I love what you're doing with the podcast, and the episodes I've listened to have been top notch. So congrats to you, and thanks to your listeners for tuning in.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, here's my ask of you. First, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Second, tell a friend. Better yet, share it with all your friends and contacts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Honestly, wherever you hang out online is fine with me. Please leave me a review if you could on iTunes or Spotify or both. The reviews really do help. And finally, try to find one takeaway from this episode that you can apply to your own life. Commit to trying something, anything. As the saying goes, no harm in trying. I leave you with this one question. How do you define the word excellence?